Welcome back to a live reading of The Effigy of Love, as written by Tony Sherblom and read by Juho Hankela. This is Chapter 8, Heart as Black as Coal. After a morning spent at the heels of his father, and the rest of the day under the sharp eyes of his mother, Hendrik was exhausted. Though last night had been wondrous and invigorating, the events that had transpired that morning had left him feeling like a husk. Worrying about the fate of her, and Myrtle on top of that, had worn him down, and toiling away all over the courts had wrung the rest out of him. Staying focused, with her looming in the back of his mind, was a lovingly daunting task, but the feeling of longing and anticipation, the wonders that makes your heart race and mind restless, gave as much as they took. Today had been transformed into fear and trepidation. Rats that gnawed at his heart and mind, only taking and taking. Sitting there, hovering over the ledger in front of him, he racked his brain, as he had all day. Where had they taken her? How had they done it without him noticing? Who was the culprit and why? Alas, he found no answers. Only the facts remained. The painting was gone, which meant someone had taken it, which in turn meant they had seen her and knew his secret. Though the culprit wouldn't know who that creature in the painting is, even the bare thought of someone else laying their eyes on her made the embers inside of Hendrik burn white hot. He had waited forever to see her. He was the one who was supposed to bask in her presence, not some common thief. He needed to keep her safe and secret, lest the grey taint might reach her too. Before I let you have a break, Grethelin broke the long silence that had lingered in the court. Hendrik looked up from the ledger and tightened his grip on the quill pen as a shiver ran down his spine. His mother's ice-cold blue eyes and voice held a hint of surprised sour, twisted, feigned joy. Hendrik quickly realized. That surprised him in a sickening way. Grethelin licked her thin lips and continued. I have a special task for you. Of course, mother, Hendrik replied, voice level as he pushed himself up from the table and stood straighter than a scarecrow. No matter what would unfold, he could not afford to reveal his true emotions, lest that spider of a mother catch him in her web and suck all the secrets out of him. He followed his mother's outstretched finger to the empty pail next to the burning hearth, then looked back at his mother, trying his best to conceal his confusion as the ominous feeling passed. I'll have it filled and brought back in a matter of minutes. A sly smile, like the reaper's scythe, tugged at the corner of his mother's mouth as she nodded and dismissed her son with the twist of her wrist. Hendrik's feet pattered swiftly over the flagstones as he ran down the spiral stairs to the basement where the coal chamber and furnace that heated Brightford's water supply was located. He was bewildered by the simple task. They had servants to do such dirty work as cleaning and refilling the coals for the hearth. In fact, he had never even been inside of the coal chamber before, so why send him to do it? Hendrik shrugged off the questions, for he already knew the answer. You see, there was no tasks too small or too big for Hendrik if his parents were to be believed. They'd have him do anything to keep him busy, to keep him focused, to keep his thoughts locked. This task, though, was laughable in its simplicity, hence why it was always and exclusively done by servants and not one of noble blood, though he did not complain as much as he mused at the thought. It wouldn't take him more than a few minutes to get it over with, and he would even get to stretch his aching muscles while at it. The worst part was that his mother most certainly had an ulterior motive, like expecting him to get his skin or clothes stained so she could punish him for his carelessness. It was cruel, laughably so in the light of him realizing she had some hidden agenda. He could just rinse off any soot on his skin or coal underneath his nails in any of the water basins in the corridor, though if he would stain his clothes it would be harder to clean. Then again, being well aware of these hazards, Hendrik knew to be extra careful and avoid that fate. Thus, all in all, this was as mundane a task as it could be, an almost welcoming one. Opening the heavy iron door and stepping into the darkness of the coal chamber felt like being swallowed by the night. The floor, ceiling, and walls were stained with the blackest soot, and there were no torches around, lest the whole place would burst into a storm of fire beneath everyone's feet. To some, such darkness was frightening, but to Hendrik it was the opposite. He had always liked the night because the darkness provided shelter from prying eyes as well as concealed the greyness around him. Morbid as the thought might seem, Hendrik thought black was better than the empty grey that was the world. In the dark, he could do whatever he wanted, be what he wanted, feel what he wanted. Though he had never visited the coal chamber before, somehow in the deepest recess of the castle he felt at ease. There was only him, the darkness and tranquility. No. Hendrik stopped in his tracks and looked around him, his eyes having adjusted to the dim orange light of the large furnace in the deepest recess of the coal chamber. Not alone. Though he couldn't see anything but the floor and shovel illuminated by the light spewing forth through the cracks around a small hatch in the furnace, he could feel something in that darkness, something that called out to him from the shadows where the light didn't reach, something that tugged at the strings of his mind and soul as if guiding him in the darkness. It was like a silent cry for help, like someone lost in the woods in the middle of the night, or a ship struggling to keep the lighthouse in sight in the middle of a storm. He carefully stepped closer to the furnace and looked around, the dim light illuminating nothing but dark walls. Something was there with him, he was sure of it. And that something had to be the reason his mother sent him down there. As his eyes scanned the whole small room and its dozens of pipes snaking along the walls and ceiling, he eventually found what, or rather who, was calling out to him. It can't be. Hendrik dropped the pail, and as the loud clang echoed between the stone walls, he rushed toward the one in need of saving. Indeed, it was her, or rather the painting of her, sitting alone on a pile of coal next to the steaming hot furnace, wrapped in darkness and covered by pipes. Though Hendrik had not yet laid eyes on the painting, he instantly recognized that beautiful creature whose eyes glistened in the dark like the brightest twin stars in the galaxy, gazing at them, melting in front of her. He heard the song in his mind, felt her touch on his skin, smelled her essence in the air. My love, who would bring you here and why? Though no one answered him directly, he found the answer as soon as the thoughts had sprung to his mind. Mother, he hissed through gritted teeth, as rage hotter than the burning coals in the furnace incinerated within him. This was why she gave him this mundane task. She wanted him to find the painting so that she could see his reaction once he returned. She wanted to show that she was in control of everything. She wanted to stoke the fire within him and show him that he was just as ugly as they were. She wanted to rob him of her so he could be as miserable as they were. Hendrik took a deep breath and looked at the painting. The twin stars that were her eyes soothed his fiery soul, told him everything would be all right now that he had found her, and indeed they would. Hendrik would make it so. Mother would get no pleasure out of this. He would douse the fire within him, fill the pail as asked, and act as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Feeling his soul, heart and body loosen its tension, he whispered, "Thank you, my love." Alas, calming down was not the end of it, merely the beginning. He still needed to come up with a plan on how to get her out and when. He could by no means carry a painting up from the coal chamber in the middle of the day. Someone was bound to witness him do that. And then he would be in trouble. But neither could he leave her here, sitting in the dirty blackness. Some servant might steal her to earn a few meager coins, or worse, they'd burn her. Hendrik could hear his heartbeat in his ears as the thoughts ran frantically through his mind. Noticing his brow was beading with sweat was the anchor that tethered him to the reality of the situation. This was exactly what his mother was hoping for. To his mother, that two-legged spider, it was as much a lesson in obedience as it was a showing of her power. Nothing could be kept hidden from her in the castle. Everything got stuck in her web. It was a sick game to play, especially on your own flesh and blood, and a horrible way to rule a castle. Being cornered like this, Hendrik had only one option. Desperation was to be replaced with deceit. Fire needed to be fought with fire, and God knew the fire Hendrik carried within him was all-consuming. Though it almost hurt him to have to stoop down to the same level as his dreary mother, it was all he could do. Hendrik filled his lungs with the black void of the coal chamber, the smell of her mixing with the dank darkness, and donned a sturdy cloak of patience. "Fear not, my love. I'll return well before anyone else finds you," he whispered as he hid her behind thick pipes. It was a sorry hiding place, but it would have to do. Surely no one would think of looking for hidden treasure in the coal chamber. At least that's what he hoped as he took a step back and quickly shoveled the pail full of coal. The iron ring clattered against the wooden door as Hendrik shouldered his way back into the court. With determined steps he approached the hearth and put the pail down in the exact same position as he had been, even making sure the handle was facing the same direction as he had when he had taken it. Finally, he stepped behind his chair, his back straight as an arrow, face as blank as an empty canvas, and awaited Grethelin's response. Though the game had only started, Hendrik felt sure of his victory. Desperation and determination both burned within him, further fueling the fire he was ready to unleash. Yet, the silence that settled over the room whispered disasters into his ears. His mother's sharp eyes running over him, scrutinizing every wrinkle in his clothes, every speck of dust on his collar, every emotion hidden behind his mask, made his hands tremble. "You're sweating," she said bluntly, eyes boring through his skull like a hawk searching for his prey. "The coal chamber's not that far." Hendrik knew full well what was going on. She was luring him into her web, but she would not succeed. Though he was good at lying, a terrible skill born out of grey necessity, he was unsure if his skills would be enough to fool his mother at this moment. Alas, there was nothing else to do but play the game. "You're correct, Grethelin." "Mother," she corrected Hendrik with a guttural growl as her eyes lit up with that familiar inferno. "Mother," Hendrik repeated calmly, bowed his head slightly, then continued. "The furnace was glowing hot, and I made much haste, hence the sweat. I did not notice it before finishing the task, and for that I apologize. I will clean myself post-haste before we continue, if you would permit my leave." Hendrik watched his half-lies chip away at his mother's hard surface, revealing a soft uncertainty beneath it that was rarely seen. It was the perfect emotion to stir inside of her, as it instantly made her hesitant and that fire in her eyes shrink. Yet, for all these signs of victory, the void of silence between them felt infinitely large, and he feared it would swallow him. "Then go, now," she finally spat and gestured for Hendrik to leave. He bowed and turned toward the door, but as he grabbed the ring pull, Grethelin added, "Do not come back before I send for you. I have urgent tasks to tend to, and you'd only be in the way, as always." A snarky remark. She was frustrated beyond her limits, as she had lost the game before it had even begun. Hendrik was lucky he had already turned his back to his mother, else it would have been hard to hide the grim satisfaction underneath his mask. His mother had swallowed the lie, hook, line, and sinker, and all he had to do now was hope that the fish would stay hooked until he had solved the real problem, rescuing her.